Well, hello. Thank you for inviting me into Words and Actions. I saw the place from outside. I'm staying nearby, attending the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and I was drawn into this place, very welcoming.
Good.
Thank you for having me here this morning, Janet. Before we jump into the conversation, I have a little tradition that I do with these conversations. To begin, we do a 3, 2, 1 and a clap.
3, 2, 1 and a clap.
And then we begin.
Okay.
Just one single clap.
Yeah.
Would you like to join me?
Yeah.
Here we go. 3, 2, 1. There we go. And we're in. So,
Good.
Janet, words and actions. Like I say, I was drawn in. I was also drawn in for a personal reason as well. So my business name is Words and Ideas.
Okay.
So quite similar.
Yeah.
I feel words and ideas are important. And words and ideas, from a quote from Robin Williams, words and ideas will change the world. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about words and actions.
Well, words and actions actually goes way back to after I lived in Ireland for a long time, although I'm from Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. And when I came back, I lived and worked for a while in an area called Craigmillar, which is famous, or was famous for being a deprived community on the outskirts of Edinburgh, and I worked there for a while, and when I moved from there to another very nearby area in Edinburgh, I went freelance instead of working for the festival, because Craigmillar Festival, as it was, employed arts workers and lots of other people. They became the biggest employer in the area, serving them. And I learned a huge amount about the importance of creativity and the arts for social and economic development. But after I ceased to live there, I could no longer be an employee of the arts team, because that was the rule, and that was fine. So I went freelance. And I thought I should have a name for the bank account, if nothing else. And then I thought, what do I do? What do I actually do? And I thought, well, I do words and I do actions. And that was how it began, as a name, but it's kind of stuck with me as a concept. So I've done lots and lots of other things since, both in the area of community arts, community development, and always issue-based, and gradually morphing more and more into peace activism. Originally just on nuclear disarmament, but now on a range of other things as well. And so when we set this place up, there were 2 organisations. The landlord wasn't happy about having a deal with 2 different organisations. So I revived Words and Actions to be the shop, you know.
So where did that kind of come from you? So when you was back in Ireland, was there a moment that you started to discover for yourself that creativity had a massive impact on you?
I think I've known that always, and part of that has been because of the Edinburgh Festival and its Fringe, because I'm the same age as the festival. I thought until I was 13 that the festival was about me. My father told me that. He was great for telling you lies. He told me my smallpox vaccination was writing that said "Made in Scotland." So, I mean, a huge number of my ideas about life and fairness and what was going on came from that kind of background, and the festival seemed to encapsulate the whole of a kind of genre of people that grew up post Second World War. And I mean, the welfare state is equally was part of that too, but it was about looking after everybody's needs. It was about using creativity to envision and imagine a better future. It was about using culture to exchange ideas and understand each other across Europe in particular at that point in time. I mean, it's quite unthinkable, and I find it very bittersweet that we're in the current situation we're in, with Europe arming itself to the teeth via the US and other influences, and everybody at loggerheads, and the terrible othering of human beings that goes on with the present government's immigration policies, for example.
So tell me a little bit about how creativity can influence the things that are going on in the world, the big things, the big political things, the wars, the atrocities that are happening. How can the arts have any effect on that? Because some people would say
they're the only thing that has any effect on that. The truth is that people don't change their views unless they're emotionally engaged. That's what actually makes people change. And I mean, in the area of nuclear disarmament, for example, you may or may not be aware that there is a thing called the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is binding on all countries that sign up to this treaty. And nobody actually in the political world thought that it would ever even be achieved as a treaty that was an option for countries to sign up to. But what made the difference was that rather than engaging on the issue of the politics, the so-called security, the number of weapons, the arms control measures, the big boys, and I say boys advisedly, grown-up stuff, that wasn't making the changes at all. But when a bunch of people started to focus on the actual catastrophic humanitarian impacts that nuclear weapons have, and started talking about how they make you feel, how it makes you feel to think about, in our case in Scotland, we have 200 nuclear warheads here, so-called controlled by the US, but they are completely dependent on the US and not the UK government. And they are primed and able to be targeted in order to take out millions of people in Moscow. Now that's quite you can't face that unless you're prepared to open your mind to vision and change and to understand that emotionally. So one thing is that unless you can actually make people feel, you're not going to affect change. But the other is that when you are trying to think through solutions and visions and answers to problems, you have to be able to think outside the box, you have to be able to see a different world, and you can't do that if you've stifled your creativity and your creative capacity. So, I mean, going back to when I came back to Scotland after living in Ireland, I mean, I learnt that lesson very much when I saw the way that the post-Republican Irish world was pulling itself up by its bootstraps. I had a mother-in-law that used to say, burn everything British except for the coal. And they were really getting behind the Irish economy, and that paid off, as we can see now. I mean, at that time, in 1969, when I went to Ireland, I'd never seen anybody begging in the streets, but I saw it there. And now that situation is completely reversed. And this may sound as though it's distant from creativity, but it's not. And one of the major elements in the revival that happened in Ireland over that period of time was the cultural revival that was happening with the Abbey Theatre in particular, Yeats, the rediscovery of the language, the poetry and painting and arts activity that people were freed up and able to do. And that was a very important part in what then led to a more political change. So, and I worked in issue-based theatre with children, and very often, I mean, I remember I wrote a play called Has Anyone Here Seen Joe? And it was actually about the different kinds of relationships that a young teenager has how he sees himself or herself in the family context, in the mate's context, in the teacher's context, and the different ways that you can kind of reinvent your personality to suit, and how you make those decisions and what is essential for you as a person. And that was really, it was about relationships, the theme of the thing. And the discussions that came out of that for these kids were in Thatcher's Britain, there was just nowhere in the education system for them to explore any of that. And tell me that that didn't make a difference to their ongoing connections with how they interpreted the world. We did it as like a little 3-act play with quite long workshops in between the 3 acts, where the kids that we were working with would take on the persona of the characters in the play and resolve or not resolve their dilemmas, you know.
So we've been living in a time at the moment where I'm not sure what it's like for the Scottish government here, but the UK government have been stripping back the performing arts from education. They've been
Scotland's
tearing
doing it now too, you know.
And so what's the danger, having grown up with the arts, having, you know, like you said, you were born at the beginning of the festival here, you've experienced the arts throughout your whole life, it seems to have given you so much. What would you say to anyone that says there's no value in that within education? Well, because that's what I fear the government think.
I think it is what the government think, but I mean, I actually think that, I suppose I have very cynical views on education in general, as far as compulsory state education is concerned, and private education is another can of worms altogether, because that's the training of an elite is not what I would think is an important part of education. But the removal of the arts from it, the removal of, let's talk about just the most basic things, school dinners. You know, there was a time when every child who went to school, again, going back to that post-war period, got a healthy meal prepared by individuals that cared for them from basic ingredients, and very often the best nutrition that they could get. Now they have an option to pick up bags of ultra-processed food manufactured by huge corporations. And
we know scientifically what that does to a child. Yeah. We know the effect that has on them. If they're having a healthy meal compared to an unhealthy meal, that will affect their learning capabilities. It will affect their mood.
Absolutely. And one of the things that, with work that I do with an organisation called Secure Scotland, was we had a seminar a few years ago now, but there was a person that was working for an organisation called Nourish, great organisation, who was talking about adverse childhood experiences related to diet, and the levels of anxiety that are produced for children whose parents are feeding them out of food banks is actually impacting their mental health and capacity really severely, you know. So, you know, to take all these things away that are absolutely fundamental, and that includes the arts, it's difficult. David, my partner in both this exercise and in my life, is a former teacher, and like many, would work very hard and in a very committed way for the benefit and the education of the children in his care, you know. And I'm not having a go at teachers here. No,
I think we've got some wonderful teachers, don't we?
Absolutely.
I've got some friends that are teachers, and it is their passion to give to children, to give to the youth, to build a better future. But I think it's the problem is the fundamental system that's forcing the teachers into certain directions.
Well, and so it has been, because formal compulsory education grew out of a need to train people to fulfill their role in factories and to make them biddable. And I mean, it is still the case that the kindest and most loving teacher of a reception class in a school the first thing they have to teach children is to sit in the carpet, you know, sit down, behave, listen, obey, you know. And that's really not good for people. And the arts is really critical in reversing that and
well, I think that
developing autonomy.
That word of critical thinking is so important for children, and I do feel like it's pulled out of them.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely disastrous that they're taking art out of schools. I mean, the latest one is that the Arts Council is no longer going to, the Scottish, Creative Scotland, is no longer going to fund individual artists. They'll fund organisations that are very good at filling in lengthy, and believe me, I've done it and tried, lengthy form-filling applications that
tick a lot of boxes.
Well,
but
it's not just that, but they're also, to be able to do them is engaging something that is not creativity. So people with a natural capacity for working creatively as their modus operandi are going to find it even more difficult to
I have personally.
Access funding.
I'm dyslexic, and I struggled a lot at school. And then I found this creative life within theatre, and it's been so beneficial to me. But then when I started to get to a point in my life where I could start to give back and help others, and I needed some backing to be able to do that, I couldn't do the forms because it wasn't part of who I am. So I was unable to reach out and get, if there is help out there, it wasn't accessible to me as a creative.
I think it's a huge problem, but I mean it's part and parcel. And if I have any optimism, it's not in the continuation of the Edinburgh Festival as it has now become, but it is very, very strongly tied to autonomous creativity and to people being able to take responsibility for their own conduct, to remove consent and to do that in imaginative and creative ways, to remove consent from systems that are othering people, that are making it, that are making us doubt our own authenticity. I think that's the other very important function of the arts, is always trust your first thought, your original concept. It might mean you have to fine-tune it, but don't dismiss it because you think it's not original, you know. These are critical messages for children and young people, but for all of us, you know. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with the festival, but I mean, I think it's absolutely disgusting that we've got a Scottish Creative Scotland refusing to fund individual artists, and at the same time, you've got this mammoth enterprise sitting like a groke over the city of Edinburgh, pooling resources and money and, to some extent, diverting people's creativity into hedge funds in California. I think that's really disgusting, and I think it's also breaking the city as the capitalist advantage taking of the arts has broken so much of this city, which I love very much. We used to have a tradition in Scotland at New Year of first footing. And the point about that was that you went to some central point in your community. In Edinburgh, it was the Tron Kirk for midnight to see the bells, hear the bells, see in the new year with companions and friends and family and to celebrate that, and then to make your way home, and while doing so, be the first foot, be the first visitor in the door of anywhere that you passed. And you know, I mean, I think that was a great and celebratory and wonderful tradition, and it happened with bells on in Edinburgh. And so what happened was that it became Edinburgh's New Year. So now the city centre is closed off to people that live here unless they pay money. My daughter lived in New Street for during the beginnings of all of that, and was expected to wear a wristband. Okay, it was given to her free. Expected to wear a wristband in order to be able to
prove
come and
that
go.
you live where you...
It's her own home.
In your own community.
And she couldn't first foot anybody because there were like thousands of Germans in the streets. And that creates a situation. I think there's nothing wrong with Germans coming to visit Edinburgh to participate in New Year. But it creates a situation where that becomes something, again, to other.
I guess it sounds to me like the problem lies within the moment. It's okay to invite new people in, new communities in, but it's the moment of trying to make money from that.
Yes.
Is that creates the barrier.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at how people, I mean, the immigration policy and compare that to the tourist policy, it's just the most disgusting contradiction you could possibly imagine, you know. But the thing about all of that with Edinburgh is that it's also had a very, very bad impact on the environment itself. The city is filthy. A lot of it is broken. They shouldn't have enormous tourist buses with antennae going up and down a medieval street in the middle of the town. You know, that should not happen at all, you know. And
Coming from London, I'm seeing this as a clean city. It is cleaner than London. You have that. It's actually, having been here a week, this is one of my most favourite cities I've visited as a new visitor. But I can imagine for yourself growing up here and spending your life here, that yes, you can see, you've seen so the change.
So much destroyed, you know. And my first marital home was on the Royal Mile, in a place called, it was a little courtyard called Cecil's Court. That's it, just below St Mary Street, and that was in the very early 1970s. And at that time, all of the shops on that section of the Royal Mile were grocers, bakers, high street shops. You know, I could do everything with a double buggy and a basket on the back of it.
Whereas now it's been turned into tourist shops.
It's nothing but tourist shops, nothing but tourist shops. And also that it was filled with families. And I mean, I think that's quite unforgivable. And it was it happened over a period where they knew better, where in other cities they were desperately making efforts to try and bring families back into the city centre. But in the 1970s, if you walked down the Royal Mile, there were kids everywhere, every bit of green space at the back of, in the closest down the back of the Royal Mile, full of children playing, you know, including my own.
So I'd like to try and find a way that we can make these cities, bring them back to the communities that they once were, because there's so much value for the city to have communities within it, aren't there?
Well, I suppose that's the other side of it, and I mean, I'm probably sounding immensely negative, and yet here I am, and I'm still putting art on the walls and encouraging people to come and do workshops related to creativity. We had some great workshops in this room, you know, and we have little acoustic gigs here, and poetry readings and show films and all that stuff. And that's very, very integrated into the work for peace and the political work. But, and so, I mean, I am an optimist at heart, and I do think that there are people that are just doing the stuff. And I like to imagine that, and unless we completely destroy ourselves, that will always be the case. But the system that we've been talking about is so close to completely destroying the planet through climate change, blowing it up with nuclear weapons, creating so many conflicts and so much suffering. When you look at what's happening in Gaza, which is largely happening because Israel is a nuclear-armed state with the backing of the US, and it has the capacity to behave in the way that it does, which is never going to resolve any kind of anything, you know. I mean, we're either on a road to complete destruction, or all these ordinary people that think differently to that. And I'm totally convinced that there's more of us than there are of the bad guys. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think that the removal of consent or the removal of participation is really key to it. And you do see that in Edinburgh as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether you've been down with the Pleasance, across the road from the Pleasance. Mm-hmm. There's a little blue box. Have you seen that?
I have noticed that, yes.
Yeah, have you been there?
I haven't, no.
Well, you should go there.
Okay.
It's an art gallery.
Really?
Yeah. It's an art gallery and a performance
like
space.
A police telephone box?
Like a police telephone
box. The TARDIS?
Yes. At the moment, it's currently painted a bit like a zebra. It gets changed all the time.
Okay.
It's my daughter's project.
Oh wow! So is the door open all the time?
No, it's just when they're there.
Is it from the outside? It's an art project, is that?
No, it's around it, in it, with the people that are connected with it. Mm-hmm. They sometimes have street performers there. They sometimes have tea parties in the bit of grass next to it. They sell stuff out of it.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's the real deal, mm-hmm. you know. And it's what I said my son is a musician, and one of my sons, I've got loads of kids, mm-hmm. And he and his sister earned the money for their entire musical education, because I was at that stage a single parent and living on the estate. But they busked by playing the fiddle and step dancing and playing the harp on a little bit of grass in the middle of the Royal Mile, and they did that from when they were about 8.
Wow!
And that tradition continues, you know, mm-hmm. and that was a really important part of their education. Not just their musical education, because it funded that and it paid for a lot of their instruments, but also how to come and go with other people, mm-hmm. how to self-regulate in a free performance space. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's now all been taken over by corporate fringe, and you have to have a pass and you have to do mm-hmm. all that, you know. You didn't have to do that. It's self-regulated really beautifully with mm-hmm. a sort of morning drawing the best pictures out of a hat.
So I've had my daughter is she's 15 and she's into her music. She lives for music, and she's just starting to go out there into the world busking. And I've seen such a change in her since she's been doing that, since she's been engaging with the outside world. And in Cambridge, the busking rules are self-regulated. They say, look, only be in that spot for 1 hour and move on. And everyone does that finally. Yeah. All the artists mingle together, they all chat to each other. Mm-hmm. They say, oh, and it's my turn now. And you move on. Yeah. There's no problems. So that regulation of artists, where does the need for that even begin?
Well, it's somebody who sees the opportunity to make a fast buck out of it. Mm. That's one of the things. And the other is that somebody puts the fear of God into other people, that you're going to get sued, you're going to, if you don't have it properly regulated, you'll have drunk people importuning people like that's never happened mm-hmm. before, or people that aren't up to the quality will turn up and spoil it for everybody, and mm-hmm. there's all sorts of fears that are created that then
Fear is the ultimate weapon of control.
Then mean it has to be controlled, you know.
I'm meeting so many young artists that are suffering with an anxiety, a fear that they can't use their own voice, that they can't speak because it may damage their career.
Yeah.
They may not get the acting job because they shared their opinion once.
Yeah.
Even if they shared their opinion 10 years ago, they're so fearful of it that they'll have no career, no opportunity because they've had a fault.
We have a tradition in nuclear disarmament campaigning of getting what we call Ken Speckles, that's a Scottish word.
And what does that mean, Ken?
Ken Speckle, what is Ken Speckle? It means...
If you're doing in your community walking about the streets, people who are recognised by everybody as a well-known people in the community who have got something to contribute, you know. So on a national scale it means people you would look up to as kind of...
I suppose it's like influencers, except in real life.
In real life, in real communities.
Yeah, you know.
You don't need to be a good kid's parent.
You can be a better...
Yeah, you don't need to be doing good. Anyway, we had this idea, and had it for quite a long time, about having Ken Speckles for disarmament, because it was a good way of getting people to consider the issue, you know. Which involved getting, people to speak out or write a song or just put their name on the line as being, you know, that they thought nuclear weapons in Scotland were a disgrace and they shouldn't be there. And that used to be really easy. Obviously, you're probably too young to remember, but there's a theatre company called 784, which toured the country in white transit vans and did polemic theatre on the big issues, you know. So all of them
was it kind of like theatre and education?
No,
different.
no, more like agitprop.
Okay.
You know. So you would just go to a place in Ullapool and find somebody that knew where the town hall was and negotiate to get the town hall, and everybody in the company would help set up the show, and you would engage local people to assist with that, and then you'd do the show and you would engage with the people in that community. It was very hard work, believe me, but it was great fun. And so a lot of very well-known Scottish actors of a certain generation, they're now all about my age, so but they were all part of that. So getting them to be Ken Speckles for nuclear disarmament was absolutely no problem. But getting the current generation, even people, like I've approached a number of my son's friends and colleagues. He's 30. No, he's not. He's 31. Like you, they say, well, totally, of course, you know, but I couldn't come and be in a photo shoot. I couldn't speak out on a platform because
of the fear of being rejected.
Yeah.
That fear of rejection is so loud now.
And sadly, often saying, "Oh, I could do it in Scotland, but it would affect my prospects in London." You know, that's
where is freedom if we don't have that voice? If we're not allowed to say what we think, if we're not allowed to be our true self without the authenticity, there is no freedom, is there?
Well, that's the problem. But I do think that it seems that despite their best efforts, or despite the best efforts of the machinery that is capitalism, I'm using capitalism in a very loose way, or fascism, or any of it, it's not so strong. I mean, it's immensely powerful because they have control over the means to destroy us all. and they have power over where we can live and what we can eat. But that, especially the last one, we give them that power. And if we stop giving it to them, they won't have it. Because actually there's more of us. It could change. It could all be rejected. We could find an economy that actually works for delivering resources that we need to share, that we find a way of negotiating our way around conflict without resorting to the use of weapons of mass destruction. That we have the capacity to do all of it. But whether it'll happen and whether it'll happen in time, I don't know.
I like to go to that place of optimism. The more people that I'm meeting on the journey of doing this podcast, the more people that I'm meeting like yourself.
I'm not in the least surprised. I'm not surprised at all.
And I completely agree with you that there is more of us than there is of them. And there is hope in the future that we will have freedom to speak, because I think people are waking up to it. People are waking up to being silenced. We've had this for me, it feels like there's been since the early 2000s, the birth of the internet and social media, there's been this crackdown on people being allowed to say what they think. And it's become more and more intense, but so much so to the point that I think that may be breaking now. That for me personally, I've found that the more I speak, the more I'm truthful to myself on an individual level, the better my life has become. And I'm seeing others like that as well.
I mean, a lot of it is about, and that's where, again, trying to ensure that the arts gets in there, even if the arts councils are not doing their job, and even if schools are not doing their job, there's still an immense amount that can be done to, if somebody says, "What's your name?" you say, "Why do you want to know?" I mean, it's a balance between somebody says, "What's your name?" and of course you tell them your name because that's a civil and friendly and, reasonable thing to do. But recognizing that you have a choice about whether you answer that question or any other question. You actually have a choice. I mean, I suppose one of the things that I've had the good fortune to experience is taking direct action, non-violent direct action, blockading gates and cutting fences and that kind of stuff. And there is the bit that for me is of enormous value from that experience is recognizing, it's helped me to recognize the number of situations in which I have a choice that I'm told I don't, even down to really fundamental things that you think you have no choice about, like, you have to collect your children from school at the time that the school finishes, otherwise you just have to do that, But actually you don't, you have a choice. And you choose, most of the time, to cooperate with that because you care about your child, Equally, you could arrive 2 hours early and say, we're going somewhere else.
This is one of the things that has hindered my family. And so when I was growing up, my parents took me camping all around the UK. And it was so beneficial to my life. It brought my family together. I grew up with nothing but love, and I had a fun childhood, and I experienced a lot that's given me value and education. But for my children, if I wanted to take them on holiday, I would be fined £50 per day per child for taking them out of the system, to give them love, affection, an education in my way, I would be fined for that.
Yeah.
What at what time was that? Did someone say that there's a benefit to do that to families?
Well, this is where we need to be on our toes, I suppose, because the thing
I was on my toes.
And the first thing to know about that is to know it, and to know that you have a choice, you know, and you could do it and then refuse to pay the fine, and you could take it as far.
Well, that's what I did.
You know,
that's what I did.
Interesting.
Yeah, I chose because I knew the benefit from me having that time with my family. That I said, no, my children are going on holiday with me. My children are coming away for a week out of the school system.
Yeah.
We can't afford to do it in the summertime. We have to do this now, so it's happening. And you know what? I never actually paid any money.
Yeah.
It was just the threat of the fine.
Yeah.
But what's also interesting, they don't do this to private school kids.
No.
If you go to private school, you can take your children out of education whenever you wish.
Yeah.
The ones that do have the money to be able to go in the term time.
Yeah.
So that's a way of taking action.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about how you've discovered that artists can take action to make a difference within this world.
It's, I mean, going back to my early involvement with disarmament campaigning, and the Vietnam War, I mean, it seemed very obvious to me that Joan Baez and Bob Dylan had a lot more to do with the end of that than Henry Kissinger did. You know. So it's difficult for me to quantify because there are so many. It's so in your face if you actually really start thinking about it.
It comes down back to
photograph of that little girl with the napalm.
It comes back to those emotions rather than the numbers and the facts and the figures.
Yeah.
The emotions that draws within people.
I mean, I'm not dissing the facts and the figures and the numbers because you need them as well. But the first thing you need is to make the emotional hit, you know. So that's part of it. And it's also, people take new ideas in very different ways. You know, that series of photographs that Justine did is part of a project where she took photographs at her own bedroom window every morning at dawn for a year. And they're all different. That's just a small sample of them. But the act of doing that as a project, both for herself in the process of doing it, but also in communicating to other people, the idea that every day you get another shot at it. Every day it's laid out. The dawn comes and lays out another day before you, you know. And being able to still and contemplate that is a really, really valuable part of making the changes that you might want to see in the world, or even just being aware or being comforted or gaining strength. I mean, why do we sing at funerals, you know, if not for comfort and to express and share an emotion about something? But it's also, I mean, how many funerals have we been to where you've actually learned a whole lot of stuff about somebody's life and what they've done? And that wouldn't happen if we didn't have this
connection through art and through creativity. And it happens on the other end of the scale with weddings as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way that we celebrate weddings with music, with song, with dance.
Yeah. So those are you know, very obvious parts of it, and I think if you David asked me, said the other night, was he an artist? Which I think was a joke question. You know, I said, yes, you're a poet. He said, if I wasn't a poet, would I still be an artist? I was like, yes, because that's who you are. You know, it's about how you actually look at the world, and how you think about responding to difficult situations. I mean, that can be, and for me, is often political, if you mean by that taking actions that are going to attempt to change government or local authority policies. But it can also be just about communicating. Communicating ideas and new ideas and better ways of doing things, better understanding of other people, creating a space in which love can flourish. You know, I think that's absolutely vital to our well-being. You know, my son has I've got a 6-year-old. I've got various grandchildren, but I've got one who's 6, who goes around with her dad, and he's doing a gig, and she'll just go on stage with him, and she doesn't think that's any kind of a big deal, you know. And sometimes she'll do an interpretive dance when he's singing, which you can kind of go, get her out of here, you know. But sometimes it's really beautiful, sometimes it's both, you know.
And how old is she?
She's 6.
She's 6.
And sometimes she'll just come and sit in a chair and watch him while he's singing. And one of the most moving and powerful things I've seen, he's got a song that he sings that's actually about his feelings for her. And he sings that song, and she'll sit there looking at him, and it would blow you away, you know. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. But the same child, somebody was attempting to bully her in some way at school, and she just turned around and said, "You have no control over me." You know, so
wonderful.
She's enabled already by a very strong association through both her parents with art. She's yeah.
And how does that make you feel, looking at someone of that age and seeing them?
It just makes me feel great. I just feel, and I mean, we've got a squad of grandchildren between us, and I am so joyful that they are having for most of the time, the childhood experience that they should have. And I know they're all artists.
And I guess that's where you can find the optimism, is looking to the youth, looking at the purity of children and how they have that opportunity to move this world forward in a better direction. Yeah,
it also makes me feel very ashamed that we're not handing them over a world that's in better shape, but that's another story.
I guess we've done the best, some of us have done the best with what we can.
Yeah.
And you're actively trying to make a difference. So that is something that we should find that you should be proud of within life.
Well, I certainly would rather be doing what I'm doing than joining in with the bad guys. Well, they're not bad guys, but you know, and one of the things I often say about like situations of so-called war, I mean, I think war is just absolutely disgusting as a concept that anybody could have, that any sort of ideological difference could be resolved in that way, you know, by killing people. But there are two sides, but the two sides, I think we've spoken about and made very clear in the conversation we've had, is there are people who think that we should be nurtured, we should use our creativity for the common good, that we can move forward and share our resources and treat the planet in a sustainable fashion. And that is actually more important than individual concerns that we might have about our own welfare. And there are people that don't think that, and that think that it's necessary to control everything and everyone, and to use whatever brutal systems they can invent in order to do that. And that's the two sides, and I know which side I'm on, and I'm not going to change sides, whatever happens, whether they're winning or whether we're not. I mean, it's just, that's it.
Well, this has been a wonderful conversation.
Good.
It's been a really important conversation.
Really, I've enjoyed it.
Well, yeah, I really do appreciate it. But just before we wrap this up, have you got any words of advice for anyone out there that does feel silenced by the system, that does feel that they themselves, their authenticity has been suppressed by the way that the world currently is, and how to possibly escape that?
Well, I'm not one for giving other people advice when I dip into the trough of despair and not knowing how to claim my own authenticity so much of the time. And recently that's been quite problematic for me. But I do know that resting up, doing things that you enjoy, accepting the love of those that are close to you, and if that seems not to be present, to remove yourself from that situation, and to look to the arts. Go to a gallery, go for a walk in a nice park. You know, that's it.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again, Janet. I really do appreciate it. And if anyone has been watching or listening, we appreciate you for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Okay.
Thank you. Wonderful.
That was nice.